training and research assistant with Haven Horizons, and Haven Horizons is a national domestic, sexual and gender-based violence prevention centre. For anyone joining our Lunch and Learn for the first time, these weekly sessions were developed as part of Haven Horizons' virtual community of practice, which brings together academics, frontline professionals and others involved in the field of domestic, sexual and gender-based abuse. Our community of practice promotes collaborations and the sharing of knowledge and resources. Members and non-members are welcome to attend the weekly Lunch and Learn sessions on Teams. The link is posted regularly to our social media pages as well as within the community of practice. And you can share this link with any colleagues or any individuals who may be interested in participating. If you're interested in becoming a member of our virtual community of practice, you can email me on training@havenhorizons.com. Recordings from the Lunch and Learn sessions are available on our YouTube channel and in the Lunch and Learn section of our community of practice, so feel free to comment on any of the sessions and share your thoughts. You can also keep up to date by following Haven Horizons on our social media or visiting our website at www.havenhorizons.com. For today's Lunch and Learn Spotlight session, we're delighted to welcome Dr. Hilary McCollum to talk to us. Hilary is a feminist researcher, a campaigner and an independent violence against women and girls consultant. Hilary currently chairs and was a quality assessor for domestic abuse related death reviews within the UK Home Office from 2022 to 2025. She uses creative activism to challenge myths around sexual and domestic abuse. Her memoir, Funny Peculiar, about surviving child sexual abuse, was published in 2008 under the pseudonym Constance McCullagh for legal reasons. While publishing fellow at the Seamus Heaney Centre, Queen's University Belfast, she organised an international conference on the role of the arts in creating a world without violence against women and girls. And Hilary will now share some more insights with us into her work, focusing on the role of the arts.
Thanks very much, and thanks for having me back again. Okay, so I'm going to be talking from the point of view of both being a writer and a creative activist on violence against women and girls, but also as somebody who is very passionate about us needing to do more thinking about how we go about preventing violence against women and girls. And I think the arts have got a significant role to play. I just want to start with a little bit of context. So we've had more than a century of feminist campaigning on violence against women and girls, dating back to the suffragettes and before that. We've had more than 50 years of refuges. In Ireland, we've had more than 30 years of rape crisis centres, and actually in the UK and US, they date back even further to the early 70s. We've got 30 years of interagency work. And then in 1995, governments from across the world made a commitment to preventing and eliminating violence against women and girls. So I thought it might be worth just thinking about how far have we got on that journey of preventing violence against women and girls. Has there been significant drops in violence against women and girls over that 30 years? And I think it would be hard to argue that there has been a really major drop across those 30 years. We've certainly made it easier, I think, through legal means and through services for women to escape domestic abuse, though they can then continue to be punished through family court systems. In some countries, education programs around female genital mutilation have made a difference to the amount of FGM that happens. But I think if you look across the piece, it would be hard to say that there's been a really dramatic reduction in violence against women and girls across those 30 years. And I think that's not necessarily very surprising. I think although there have been some good national strategies, I think it has been a challenge, I think, for governments and agencies to really get their heads around what would we need to eliminate violence against women and girls, to really look at the scope of it and to put the resources required and to start assessing whether the things that we're trying are working. But also we're talking about dealing with centuries and maybe even millennia of cultural permission for abuse to happen. You know, it's been something that has built up over a very, very, very long time, where survivors have been silenced, where perpetrators have been excused and not held to be accountable for their crimes. So I think it's not really a surprise. And the arts historically have been part of creating those cultural permissions. They have been part of perpetuating myths about violence against women and girls. But I also think that they have got a real they've got a real role to play in what we need, which is cultural transformation around attitudes to violence against women and girls. And I think you can see that very clearly in the recent publication of Nobody's Girl, Virginia Giuffre's memoir published after her death. Andrew Windsor, is now known, or Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. He didn't lose his titles. He didn't lose his mansion when it first became public knowledge that he'd paid her £12 million. When the photograph of him with her as a teenager was first made public, he didn't lose his titles. He didn't lose his mansion then. When we had the infamous Newsnight interview with Emily Maitlis, still he managed to hang on to his titles, and still he managed to hang on to the mansion. But then this book is the thing that has actually brought him down. And it's not that Virginia Giuffre hadn't spoken before, because she had, but there's something about the power of having a narrative in the form of that memoir that really allowed people to understand the story in a different way. And that's partly because I think part of the reason it's been so transformative is because human beings are hardwired for stories. The reason there are so many people in the world, that why we have colonized every inch of the earth, is because of our capacity for storytelling, because it helps us to solve problems. So it's very fundamental to being human, to have stories appeal to you. And that's why we need to be thinking about how we change the stories about violence against women and girls in order to change the cultures of permission that allow violence against women and girls to be so prevalent. Right. I think one of the other things I would say, just when we were talking about Virginia Giuffre, that memoir is very, very powerful. And it's also true that wherever survivors' voices are heard, they make space for the reality of violence against women and girls to be heard and made visible and to be understood. And so I think that survivors have got a huge part to play through the arts in changing how we view violence against women and girls. But for me, it goes way beyond non-fiction. I'm interested in how we use the whole range of artistic forms, literary, performance, visual arts, all of those things to change and chip away at the culture that grants so much permission for women and children to be violated and hurt. So for me, like, I remember reading The Colour Purple and what a significant impact it had on me, reading those experiences of her being sexually abused by her father, and then going on to be abused by her husband, and her journey out of that. I remember the first time I heard Suzanne Vega's Luca, and Tracy Chapman's song, the one, I think it's called The Woman Behind the Wall, can't remember, but probably you'll all know the song I'm talking about. Films that have had a huge impact, Dolores Claiborne, which I absolutely loved, Once Were Warriors, lots and lots of films, and then we start to get the soaps covering it, and all of those things do begin to kind of create a different story within the public framework. Some of you might know this quote from Toni Morrison: "If you find a book you really want to read but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it." And that pretty much sums up my feelings when I embarked on writing my childhood memoir, Funny Peculiar. I wanted to write something that was a different kind of narrative than what had come to be called the misery memoir. And I think for me, I think there's been a danger with how some misery memoirs are read. I think they can be read in quite a voyeuristic way, in quite an othering way of survivors. And I wanted to write a story that reflected the entirety of my childhood, my interests and passions, Man United, the Wombles, Fred Bentos, steak and kidney pie, the love that I had from my mother and my grandparents, and the influence that my friends and school had on me, and not just about the abuse, because a lot of things shaped me in my childhood, and not just sexual abuse. And that's what I wanted to try and tell in the story. As Sharon's already mentioned, it was published under a pseudonym. And the reason for that was that the publisher said, essentially, your whole book is libel. And you either need to get your abuser to sign a confession. Well, actually, that's what they'd suggest. I needed to get him to sign a confession, which I didn't think was likely. I took my own legal advice, and basically, if he saw the text before it was published, it would be hard for him to sue for libel. I hadn't seen him for 27 years, not since I was 14. And I had to go and see him to get him to agree for the book to be published. And I was surprised that he did agree, but only if it came out under a pseudonym. I've written about violence against women and girls in other ways, in fiction and in drama, but because of time, I'm not going to talk about that any further. What I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about is this conference that that I organised, which took place in 2022. At that time, I had a 12-month fellowship at the Seamus Heaney Centre at Queen's University in Belfast, where I'd completed my PhD. And they supported me to organise this 2-day conference on creating a world without violence against women and girls, the role of the arts. It was a hybrid conference, which meant that we were able to have speakers and also attendees from across the world. And we had certainly speakers from Canada, England, Hong Kong, Iran, Ireland, India, Scotland, Spain, Turkey, the UK, and the USA. And it was amazing just hearing all these speakers from many different parts of the world talking about how the arts were being used where they lived to change attitudes to violence against women and girls. There were a huge range of topics were discussed over the 2 days. I'll not read them all out because you can read them yourself. But a whole range of issues around representation in popular fiction such as Marion Keyes, in speculative fiction, feminist horror, all sorts of different forms. I've included a couple of photos here that I just wanted to talk about. So the top one is of Sharon Dempsey on the left, who's a crime writer interviewing Winnie Lee. And she was interviewing her about her first novel and her subsequent writing. Her first novel is called Dark Chapter, and it was based on her experience of a very brutal stranger rape in Belfast when she was visiting Belfast. And that novel is one of the Haven Horizons books that you recommend. And she was talking, very much about turning personal experience into fiction. The photograph on the bottom is of Professor Moira Hazlitt from Queen's University, and she was talking about writing about violence against women and girls from women in the 18th century. And again, I just found that just such an amazing presentation. We kind of think that really it's only recently that women have started to speak out, but then you go back and you find these representations from earlier eras. So she talked about memoir, the memoirs of Mrs. Margaret Leeson, which included her being gang raped, from which she contracted a sexually transmitted disease, which subsequently killed her. She talked about the letters of Mary Wollstonecraft, where Mary Wollstonecraft talks about the anxieties of being a woman traveller because of fears of rape. And I guess the one that stayed with me most was a novel by Eliza Haywood called The History of Miss Betsy Thoughtless. And it was a novel about coercive control and domestic abuse. And it included the abusive husband strangling his wife's pet squirrel as a way of punishing and controlling her. So I find that really powerful, that sense that we've got this history going back at least 250, in fact, that novel was published in 1751, so more than 250 years we've got this history of where women have had the opportunity to be published. Some of them have written about violence against women and girls and written about it in ways that are really powerful. And you can access those speeches on the Seamus Heaney website. I just thought I'd finish with a poem. It's a poem that's meant a lot to me over my life, but I think it kind of encapsulates how the arts can play a role in making different forms of violence against women and girls visible, but also in making the perpetrators visible. Who is the woman who drove the children to school, made the beds and washed the dishes, hoovered the wall-to-wall carpet before slitting her throat at the bathroom mirror? Who is the man who drove his favourite niece to the party in her flowered pink frock, in her ribbons and bows, who raped her on the back seat? Why not, he said. Look how she was dressed. Besides, hadn't she been doing it for years with her father? Who are these people? Where do they come from? What kind of man? What kind of woman? Where do they live? Who lives next door to them? How come none of us ever knows them? And how is it wherever it happens, he doesn't belong to us? How is it he's always somebody else's brother, father, husband? Why is it whoever she is, she's never more than a name in the papers, some vagrant, friendless, unnatural woman? And who are you, come to that, all of you, out there, out of the spotlight, out for a night's entertainment, smiles upturned so politely, asking me why I have to be so raw and deliberately personal? Thanks.
That was incredible, Hilary. I'm actually getting all choked up here just seeing that last piece. Incredible. And thank you so much for sharing that.